Issues and individuals that have an impact on our daily lives. And now, here's your host, Mark Joseph.
Good afternoon and welcome to Public Impact. What we have today is a special on Halloween trick or treat. A lot of Christians are involved in this holiday, and for the most part, I think most kids go out there innocently trying to get candy and just have some fun dressing up in costumes. And I know I did when I was a child, and probably most of you have thought there's nothing really to this. It's just an innocent little fun time. But our guest today, Caryl Matriciana, has spent years in India as well as England in both hotspots for witchcraft and pagan practices, and this enables her to give first-hand evidence of the true devilish nature of Halloween, and her expertise has been extensively sought by filmmakers and media in the U.S., Canada, and Europe, such as Newsweek, the London Times, BBC Radio, and television, including the Marlon Maddox radio show. And Caryl recognizes that many Americans celebrate Halloween in complete innocence, but she presents an interesting case for the importance of being aware of the dark side of this holiday. We have a video special for you today, Halloween Trick or Treat. It's part of the Pagan Invasion series, part 1, and 56 minutes in full color, and it'll show you a lot of things about the truth of this holiday. So if you would welcome to Public Impact today, Caryl Matriciana. Caryl, are you there?
I am. Is that you, Mark?
That's me. Welcome back to Public Impact.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's great to have you here, Caryl. Well, first of all, let's cut right to the chase. Has Halloween always been just an innocent holiday?
Well, Halloween's origins are the festival of death. Perhaps some people think death is innocent, perhaps they don't, so that's the way I'll come right into it. But this festival only became named Halloween several thousands of years after it had been practiced by pagan cultures as a dark festival of death. The god of death is known as Samhain. This has always been known, this particular time of year has always been known as the end of the year to pagans, and it is the time when it is believed that the veil between this world and the other world is at its thinnest, and therefore the god of death, Samhain, can be appeased with tricks, with fruits, with treats of either candied skulls, vegetables, fruit, whatever the delights of him are. In some cases, in some cultures, it's been human sacrifice, and if he doesn't get what he wants, it's believed that he tricks or curses the people that give him what he wants through his priests. Now, this festival, which was practiced in the pre-Columbian New World cultures in Mexico and Central America at this particular time of year, is also known under other names, being celebrated, for instance, in the ancient Mayan city of Cumcan, where human sacrifice was very much a part of the festival of Samhain. But then as the years went on, and as the New World came into existence, the way that it became introduced into America, and particularly in the 18th and 19th century, was under the new name of Halloween, which was the name that its Celtic immigrants brought to the New World after the Roman Catholic Church in a crusade, if you will, or in an attempt to Christianize or missionize the pagans. They renamed this celebration to Samhain as a sort of feature, focusing in on the martyrs, the Christian martyrs, those who had been martyred for their Christian faith by the Romans, and it was called All Souls Day, or the Day of the Holy Ones, or Hallowed Ones. And so we get the evening before November the 1st being called Hallowed Ones Evening, or Hallow Evening, Holy Evening, and there we get the mishmash as the Catholic Church renamed the festival of Samhain to its now Christian name, or the name that many Christians believe to be a Roman Catholic or Protestant holiday.
Well, Caryl, now you pronounced this name as Samhain. I've heard we just heard in church last Sunday the youth pastor was saying Samhain. Is this all the same thing? It's just different pronunciations?
Yes, Mark. In fact, it's spelt Samhain. It's spelt Samhaine, and it's pronounced Samhain. I don't know why. I don't know how that came about, but there it is. The festival is also lifted up to the King of Death, Saban, or Savan, S-A-B-A-N, S-A-V-A-N, and then, of course, in the biblical name, that name has been given to the same god of death as Satan. So we see in the different cultures how it is called. The god is known as different gods. Now in India, where the religion of India, I was born and raised in India and lived there for 20 years of my life, and the Celts, the people that occupied Britain and France at the time of the Roman conquest, about 300 years before the birth of Christ, the Celts were believed to be the first Aryan people, the sort of lighter-raced people who came from Asia to settle in Europe. And there are certain similarities between this Celtic origin of this festival. The Celts priests were called the Druids, and so we have the religion of Druidism that comes from this era. And Druidism and the religion of India are very, very similar. You've got the caste system in India where the priests were said to rule over the people, and the Druids, the priestly order, presided over the various nature deities, and certain ceremonies and practices were very similar to the ones that I saw growing up in India. And Hinduism and Druidism both have at their foundation the belief in reincarnation, and particularly the concept of people being reborn as animals, which is called the transmigration of the soul. So you will find that today many pagans and those who worship nature deities do believe in the concept of being able to be visited by the souls and deities of those already gone in centuries past. So this festival of Samhain, or Samhain as you say it and as many people mispronounce it, is known as the end of the witches' year, and a time when the ending and the beginning, so to speak, because there's continuous tides of nature and they see one thing leading to another, and so death leads into birth, and the concept of birth and death are very closely related, which of course underestimates the horrors of death. The Bible talks about death as an incredible finality, whereas this pagan worldview sees nothing wrong with it, that you just come back in a different form. And so it's belittling the intensity and the horror of death. And you see that in a sense in these Halloween celebrations, where the concepts of skeletons, masks of horror, skulls, black death, macabreness, blood, pitchforks, bloody daggers, all these things that go with the terrors of death have all been humored, if you will, by this commercial holiday of Halloween.
Well, Caryl, you know, we are talking today about some content that you have in your video as well. It's called Halloween Trick or Treat, and you mentioned something earlier that you talked about a term called nature deities. I find this kind of fascinating because some statistics that I have, like in 1990, American consumers spent about $500 million a year on decorations, candies, and that sort of thing. And the latest statistics we have from last year, $2.4 billion spent on Halloween, making it only second to Christmas as far as what people spend on this holiday economically. I've noticed that there is a huge explosion in the New Age movement. When you mentioned nature deities, is this going right along with that New Age movement, that kind of pagan explosion?
Oh yes. It's all hand in hand, and you see, there are only two. Basically, there are only two worldviews. There is the worldview that says that there is a creator God, a designer, a creator, who is outside of nature, who intervened into nature by sending his only begotten Son, that nature is quite separate to him. He created it and each part of it, and that nature cannot become a part of him. But those who believe in the salvation that he offered, because he saw mankind on a path to destruction, he saw us eternally separated from him by sin, which ends in death, and because there is no freeing concept, his salvation package, the deal that he has given to humans, is that if we believe in his salvation through the blood that he poured out in Jesus Christ, that we can be connected back to him, and we can be called the sons of God, and we can have a relationship with him, but we will never become part of him, and nothing that has been created by him can be the same as him. Now, the other worldview that is foundationally set in the concept of evolution says that out of death came life, out of the miry slime came the divine, so to speak, so that animals from the very simple amoeba has become more and more and more complex, and through masses of death we get the life form of human beings now, and in everything there is a connection to the same energy that started it all up. Well, this concept, first of all, belittles death, because it says that through death comes life, whereas God was the very first one, from the creationist point of view, that even caused death, because he slaughtered the first sacrifice in order to cover Adam and Eve with a covering through a blood offering, and cover them up and cover their sin, and gave them a plan that was to come many years later through his Son. So both these worldviews are tremendously opposite, and everything that comes under the pagan worldview founded in evolution believes in deities, believes in deities in nature, believes in the concept of the stars and the moon and the sun and the earth all being one, here to be preserved, and then it goes along different shades of gray to eventually the very, very dark side of this concept, where we know as the religion of Satanism, the belief that Satan is actually the creator God, that Satan himself is the power behind everything, and that if you appease Satan with human sacrifice ultimately, which is the best, but animal sacrifice will do, then through ritual magic you can have more and more powers. And so this other worldview, the pagan worldview, says that through ritual you can control your environment, you can have more power to be able to exist in a happy and peaceful situation. So yes, we see in the revival of this paganism, we see that although it's a mishmash, I'm not saying that all New Agers are Satanists, and not all Wiccans are Satanists, and certainly not all pagans who believe in nature deities are Satanists, but there is the potential of getting involved as one becomes more and more fascinated in this, getting involved in the darker and darker side of it.
Right, and you're careful to say that not every person who is, for example, involved in Greenpeace or something like that would be involved in this kind of a advanced satanic type of worship, but it does.
Blood sacrifice, possibly, and they would probably abhor the concept of blood sacrifice, but I do think that the nature conservation movement, the eco movement, the environmental movement is an extremely good platform for pagans to pursue their agenda in preserving the earth. Now, they see Mother Earth as their mother. In fact, in one of the videos we made, I interviewed James Coburn, who very, very succinctly said that, we need to go back to our pagan roots. The pagans knew how to do it, that they worshipped they preserved and conserved nature, and therefore nature was good to them. And if we're not good to nature, now it's not going to be good to us. Well, we can see an incredible increase in paganism, a tremendous revival of pagan worship, of lifting up the preservation of nature through the American Green Movement, and yet look at the horrendous that we see nature paying back, if you will, by more famines, more earthquakes, more tornadoes, more hurricanes today than ever before, and yet this is the greatest pagan revival that we've ever had.
Yeah, it goes back to Genesis, where the big lie began there. Ye shall be as gods, and that's what this movement tends to get people to believe in. But steering back to the Halloween holiday per se, where this is what we're talking about, Halloween Trick or Treat is the video. You can get it by calling Jeremiah Films, and it does contain actual footage of some of these pagan rituals. These are not actors performing in this. This is the actual thing. And just real quickly, where did you get a lot of this footage from, Caryl?
Well, we have interviewed each of the Satanists and witches that are on the Halloween Trick or Treat video. We actually interviewed ourselves. It's taken years of befriending people and letting them allow us to come into their rituals, whether they were in Stonehenge, where we saw the Druids performing at this particular time of year. And in our video Halloween Trick or Treat, we interviewed a witch in England that said that there are more practicing witches in England today than there are practicing Christians. And of course that confirms what Time magazine said a few years ago, that there were 160,000 self-proclaimed witches in America. And then, we see the rise of this as more and more under the political protection umbrella. We see the rise of nature preservation. We see that in schools, the religious holiday of Samhain, now called Halloween, sometimes even called the Harvest Festival, which is what the Wiccans have always called it. This has always been known as the Harvest Festival to the Wiccans at the end of the year, at the end of the harvest, because this is one of their festivals to nature. Harvest, Halloween, and Samhain are all the same festival, but we see this festival federally funded and supported in public schools across America, whereas Christmas carols and nativity scenes can't be supported by the Americans' tax dollars, and certainly the resurrection of Jesus Christ can't be. So, a Christian needs to be wise and discerning and say, why is this holiday so openly celebrated? Obviously because it is politically correct, obviously because it is rooted in a totally anti-Christian concept where death is lifted up, just as in, we see the increase of abortion, we see the increase of partial abortion, the increase of euthanasia. All these things are so acceptable, and obviously so is this holiday of death, Samhain.
Yeah, Caryl, you mentioned an interesting term, and that's these harvest festivals. Now, you're saying that is the original name that the Wiccans gave this holiday. However, I see churches who, as an alternative to Halloween, are having their own, and they advertise them as harvest festivals, in which they bring in their congregation to have an alternative service. Is this dangerous?
Well, Mark, it depends what dangerous means. I think this is a very interesting and typical scenario where the names are all getting mashed together, the concepts are all getting mashed together, and as we become more politically integrated, as multiculturalism grows, as globalism, the concept behind tolerance for all religions as being equal grows, we will see this kind of confusion coming in, and Christians are either going to get caught in it or separate themselves from it. Now, I'm not saying that all religions, that people can't practice whatever religious philosophy they want. Obviously, this country, more than any other country in the world, allows religious freedom. But to say that all religions need to be tolerated as equal is not appropriate, because in Christianity we do not lift up the concept of death. The concept of death is horrible to God. The wages of sin is death. It's an awful term. And when I was growing up in India, the Indians themselves said that reincarnation was the most horrible concept of imprisonment, a concept that they could never get out of. They could try through yoga practice, through meditation, through self-hypnosis, through following various godmen and gurus and all sorts of rituals. They could try to better themselves in their reincarnation lives in the future. They hoped that they would go up the ladder by what they did, but it was seen to be a prison that they could not get out of. And here we are in the West lifting up the very, very same fads, in a sense, by desensitizing people when this holiday of Halloween comes along and we see macabre horror in our stores and costumes that children dress up in. We see Hollywood putting out more and more horror films, absolutely grotesque horror films. We see dungeons of horror cropping up, each one getting scarier than the other. And then we see the sort of platform which the Wiccans and pagans absolutely love to use, the concept that white witchcraft is okay, and they attempt to promote an alleged difference between black and white in such films as Practical Magic, where you get Sandra Bullock, who co-stars as the producer. She's incredibly sympathetic to magic. We get Sheryl Crow, singer with Stevie Nicks in the Fleetwood Mac group. They're singing the introductory theme song, and she's a practicing witch, a reincarnation of a 16th century witch. So, you know, we get all this idea of reincarnation being fine, and, you know, whereas you get somebody like Anton LaVey, who is the high priest of the First Church of Satan, who is a notorious black magician and Satanist, who says that there is no difference between black and white magic. It's a total myth.
Yeah, and that explanation can be found in the video Halloween Trick or Treat. We're talking with Caryl Matriciana today, and this video is really, I think, a must-see for anyone who is having a youth group and wants to get people more involved in educating people about the truth between Halloween. It's called Halloween Trick or Treat. And Caryl, how can they get this video?
Mark, they can call our toll-free number at 1-800-828-2290, 1-800-828-2290, and ask for Halloween Trick or Treat. It's a 48-minute-long video where we've actually interviewed practicing Satanists and practicing witches. They allow us to film their pagan rituals. We've also interviewed people who have come out of it, who give the most horrible testimony of what this particular time of year, the end of the year, the end of the harvest year meant to them, where one young man who is a generational Satanist talks about his involvement with having seen human sacrifice, and another witch talks about the same thing. And you know, I think we need to value and in a sense realize that these people have been saved only by the grace of God, because they are now practicing Christians who say that, you know, if only Christian parents, in fact, one of the ruling witches of Western Europe and the British Isles, and she was a mistress of a high priest of Satan, she said in the film that if only Christian parents had any idea of what Halloween really is, they wouldn't even mention the word around their children.
That comes up to our next topic here, because a lot of people are going to be hearing this broadcast right now and say, well, you know, it's just for the kids. They're just out to get candy. And after all, they celebrate it in school. It's an American holiday. The restaurants, the malls, everybody decorates and throws party. It's good business. You know, why take this fun away from the children? And you're saying, well, what do you say to that?
Well, I'm a mother with little children, and I've had to struggle through this issue too, and I think all of us as Christians are going to struggle more and more as this post-Christian America absorbs more of paganism and is more blatantly anti-Christian. Because Christians, we believe in a God that is a God of absolutes. There is absolute truth, absolute good, absolutes and bad. There's absolute sin, there's absolute salvation. And here we've got a climate growing up through America. 86% of the people polled between 18 and 34 years of age say that there is no such thing as truth, that truth and morality are shifting. And here again we see how it is based on the evolutionary concept of everything, of nature evolving upwards, of humankind evolving upwards, of morality supposedly evolving upwards. And all we have to do is look at the crime around us and the bloodshed and the mayhem and the growth in lawlessness to realize that this supposed shifting morality is not getting better, it's getting worse. And so, it's a very real time for us as Christians to say, are we going to look at this particular pagan holiday and others that are going to come up, and as Christmas gets more paganized and as Easter gets more paganized, are we going to partake of something that is the very thing that the Lord talked against when he begged his chosen people not to integrate themselves in the culture and not to be so absorbed with the culture, and letting these fudging of issues compromise us. In Deuteronomy, I'm sure you remember the scripture that tells us that the Lord doesn't want to find any of those of us involved in sacrificing our sons and daughter in the fire, but also practicing divination or sorcery or interpreting omens or engaging in any kind of witchcraft or casting spells or consulting the dead. Well, a friend of mine who is a pastor in an evangelical church, he asked his congregation how many of them had been involved in calling up psychic lines or astrological charts, but he was amazed when almost 80% of his church raised their hand at the psychic hotlines. And you see, that is all part of practicing divination and sorcery and being involved in these kind of practices that God has not permitted us to be involved in, because God loves us. He knows that there's danger. He knows that we can be bewitched by this sort of participation, that we can open doors into the supernatural that will hurt us even though we don't understand these things. And as we become more and more apathetic, the great new religion in America today is tolerance. And I saw that growing up in India when I was going to school, having to step over, as just a little child, stepping over a dead body because everybody on the sidewalk was so tolerant and apathetic, and it wasn't shocking to see somebody dead or dying or writhing in pain, because that was due to what they had done in their past lives. And so that was a punishment that you couldn't tinker with. You couldn't tinker with their karma. You couldn't interfere with the suffering that they were going through. And it wasn't until the Christian missionaries came to India and started looking after the sick and putting up the hospitals. All these are Christian concepts of helping the sick and the dying and the elderly, of putting value on human life. And here, I was on a radio show the other day where the host mocked me for saying, well, so what? I mean, what are you talking about, the dangers of Halloween? He says, all through the year there are satanic killings, and all through the year we know that there are Satanists that do their weird, wacky, bizarre rituals. So big deal. And I thought, this is incredible that a radio talk show host can say because it happens all the year, it's nothing that we should be outraged about and that we should just let it go by because this is just what wacky, weird people do.
Caryl, that is amazing, because that same talk show host probably got outraged at the fact that a homosexual got murdered a couple of weeks ago, which is an outrage that anyone gets murdered. But you see where we've gone in this area.
Yeah, and the fact that that dear homosexual was, while I think it is a hate crime, whoever gets killed, whoever.
Right.
It's not a hate crime that he was a homosexual that was so appalling. It was a hate crime because here was a man that was killed. But the activists, the homosexual activists, were so quick to use that as a vehicle in the media to say that it's the Christians, the extremist right-wing fanatics that have made our society do this to homosexuals. Now, where would they get off if we, as Christians, use that same kind of argument on the pagans when they take away our Christmas in schools or whatever it is that they do? Can we ever say that kind of thing against the pagans, the way, and the witches and the Satanists, the way that they underestimate and ridicule and are downright rude about Christianity and biblical concepts?
Well, that's true, and the answer to that is we wouldn't, because as Christians we don't get downright rude about those kind of things. We try to say the truth in love, and even when you do, you're attacked as being rude. We're talking about Halloween trick-or-treat today with Caryl Matriciana, and the video is Halloween Trick-or-Treat. It's part 1 of the Pagan Invasion series, and you can get it. We'll give you the number before we go off the air today. Before we run out of time today, Caryl, let's run through some of these innocent, or what people think are innocent, symbols of Halloween. Christians, people have, for example, the ACLU gets all bent out of shape when you have a crucifix or a cross or a fish or any kind of symbol that represents Christianity in a state logo, or on, right here in Ohio, the governor wanted to put the state motto, "In God all things are possible," and the ACLU had a fit. And we hear these things all the time. But what about the symbols of Satanism, Halloween, such as black cats, snakes, broomsticks, bonfires, jack-o'-lanterns? These all have deep meanings too, don't they?
Yes, they do. And here you see just the fact that they're allowed in the public place. Christians should understand that the very fact that these symbols are in the public place is the very reason that I feel, and that all the Christians that are taking a stand on this feel, that we mustn't get compromised and desensitized by the pagan culture around us. That, yes, certainly, in the Middle Ages, in the midst of the darkness, during the Middle Ages, there was a tremendous revival in witchcraft, and after the Romans conquered Europe and outlawed the human sacrifice to the god of death, Samhain, they couldn't openly burn hundreds and hundreds of human beings in wicker men anymore. Julius Caesar, mentioned in his commentaries that there was this big wicker man lifted up and burnt human beings in the hundreds, and the following morning there were the mountains of bones, and that's the derivation of our bonfire or bone fire as we see it today, the sacrifice of humans. And as I mentioned, because Samhain is one of the foremost ancient fire festivals, usually around this time there is a tremendous focus on fire, and I don't think we've got enough time for me to tell you about an incredible festival that I went to just a month ago with the Burning Man, a wicker man that was burnt in the fire festivals that took place here in America. But
please do. That happened right here in America just recently?
Yes, yes. It was just incredible. But anyway, what you mentioned earlier about the concept of witches and things, it was believed that on October the 31st, witches traveled to their covens flying on brooms, and that they were guided by evil spirits in the form of black cats. And so all that sort of comes into the concept of everything that is tied up with Halloween. And of course there's apple bobbing, which the Wiccans still use in their fertility rites at this time of year. In the 18th and 19th century, when there was the flood of Celtic immigrants, they brought the festival of Samhain here as Halloween, and the idea of carving out the pumpkins, which were part of the Druid priests carving out, holding the spirit guide in the turnips as they went door to door, asking the householders to give them treats to appease the god of death, Samhain, or to give the priests, the druids themselves, gifts, and if the household didn't, if they didn't give them a householder perhaps to be put into the wicker man and burnt, then they were cursed, and that's where we get our tricks, the trick-or-treat visitation from house to house. So that's where that little ceremony came from, and now, of course, the pumpkins are much easier to be carved out, and they're easier to hollow out, and so Jock, or Jack, the spirit of the lantern, sits in a pumpkin now instead of inside the turnip around the druids. But all these are increasingly being accepted as, part of American life, and I think that it is part of an American life as America becomes more pagan and just absorbs all these different things without questioning them, without seeing their roots, and not being responsible in keeping themselves separate from what the pagans practice around them. And just as you mentioned, while churches say, well, what's wrong with calling this the Harvest Festival? What's wrong with celebrating the harvest? Well, of course we can thank God for the harvest, but we should also be thanking God for the spring and the summer and the autumn, and we should thank Him for 365 days where He's given us life. We mustn't fall into the trap just because our children are tugging at our little heartstrings and saying, candy, 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 and can fill up their pillowcases. Of course this is the way that Satan is going to work on our children, through the lusts of their little fleshy teeth wanting to have candy. And I've gone through the same things, and it's hard. It's very hard for a parent.
Yeah, and because, like you say, it has been so absorbed by our culture, and what we're trying to educate you about today is that this really is a religious ceremony. This is the celebration of a religion, and this religion, it has its roots in Satan himself. This is a pagan ceremony. It is rooted in evil, and again, we're just trying to inform you about what's going on here, and that you should pray about this and find out what you're going to do, because ask yourself in your heart, ask God, do you really want to celebrate the one who is our enemy? I mean, we should be celebrating his defeat every day as we go to church and that sort of thing. Why would we give him this much credit on one of his most sacred holidays to himself? Is this, in fact, the most sacred holiday of the year for pagans?
Well, it really depends. It's the end of the year, just as is New Year's Eve, is New Year Day the most celebrated holiday in the American culture? Probably. I think Halloween only falls second to New Year Eve celebration. So, yes, the end of the pagan year and the end of the supposed Christian calendar year probably are the two highest holidays. The Satanic calendar calls for more human sacrifice at this time of year than any other time of the year. The Wiccans see it as the thinnest veil, as I mentioned, between the two worlds, the passing out of the old year and the passing in of the new year, so that they can contact the people of wisdom, the old masters and leaders of the race, so that these spirits can help them in their quest for knowledge and light and truth as they perceive it. So each of them on their various levels, celebrate it to different depths, but it certainly is just as the New Year is a big celebration on the Christian calendar, so the Harvest Festival, Samhain, is certainly the big event in the pagan calendar.
Okay, well, Caryl, we're just about out of time for today, but one quick question I had to ask. In the video, it talks about a young man who came out of the satanic movement and witnessed an actual human sacrifice. And to my best legal knowledge, the statute of limitations doesn't run out on murder. Have these people been prosecuted for some of these crimes?
No, I've been asked that question several times before, and I just have to take you back to the time a few years ago. I'm sure you remember the McMartin case of, the preschoolers, the thousands of kids that attended the McMartin preschool here in Los Angeles. And some 500 of the children were taken through 200 different therapists. and their stories were found to concur. And yet the print, the liberal media, the authorities undermined this story, and these children said that they were satanically and ritually abused. They talked about tunnels that they had been led into. They talked about human sacrifices in these tunnels and animal sacrifices, and eventually the school was closed down, and the parents, because they were being stonewalled by the district attorneys and the judges and the people in authority and the police, the parents called the former Los Angeles head of the FBI to lead the investigation and excavation of the 3 tunnels under the daycare center. And yes, they did find hundreds of small animal bones, hundreds of bones indicating human sacrifice, and not hundreds of bones, I should say, but many victims, reported seeing the human sacrifices, and there were the bones, and yet these children were ridiculed. The whole compound was sort of dug up, and caterpillars and big trucks came in and took away all the evidence, and the whole thing was just covered up. And more we see the obstruction of justice being covered up as people in authority have the power to ridicule people that believe that these things go on. And when you call in police, that there are actually police investigations that have been closed down. I know police investigators that I work very closely with. We interviewed in our video Halloween Trick or Treat law enforcement officers. So, these things are just pushed away, just not pursued, which I think goes along with our culture, with the concept of death and murder and life. The concept of preserving life has just been minimalized to such an extent that nobody is outraged anymore of the atrocities of the murders that are going on, whether they be in the name of the occult, in the name of Satan, or whether it be the legalized abortions across the nation, or even, where you know very well that the Clinton administration had been involved in deaths and murders and cover-up. And if it's done at such high political levels, why on earth shouldn't it be done in smaller towns and communities where Satanism is continuing?
Okay, well, that just about wraps it up for today, Caryl. I want to thank you for being on the program once again. Halloween Trick or Treat is the name of the video, and you can get that through Jeremiah Films at 1-800-828-2290. That's 1-800-828-2290. And the topic is, should you have your children or your family involved in Halloween? After what you've heard today, I would think you would think twice, right, Caryl?
I hope so. I hope people think it through, because this is a time where we should celebrate life, and life that we've been given abundantly for all eternity. We don't need to be involved in communicating with the dead or having any part of spiritism and medium worship at all.
Okay, Caryl, thanks for being on the program, and we'll do it again sometime, all right?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very, very much indeed.
God bless.
Bye.